be here with you today. We were just talking, it feels like home to be with my Turkish friends today. There was an earthquake that happened in Gölcük and Izmit, and was really devastating, and I had the opportunity to go spend some time in Turkey and to work in those earthquake zones. And I came to love the Turkish people. I came to think that Istanbul is one of the coolest cities in the entire world. One of those bucket list do-overs that you'd want to return to again and again and again. If you have not had a chance to do that, you should. You really should go there. It's a terrific place. And I'm just sorry that it's too early for rock. Thank you very much. Well, listen, I want to talk a little bit today about corporate social responsibility, to talk a little bit about kind of what means what. And I'd like to take you back to 2007 in October. About the 4th day of October, the rain started to fall in Chiapas, Mexico. And it fell for about 10 or 12 days straight. It fell in Chiapas and it fell in the state of Tabasco, both of them in the very far south part of Mexico. And when the rain fell in Chiapas, it just tore holes down the sides of the canyons of that beautiful mountainous area of Central America. And when it got to Tabasco, it flooded. 80% of the state of Tabasco was underwater. Some of the water got as high as 6 or 8 feet. And at one point, they had 100,000 people who were without a place to live. Over 1 million people were impacted. 300 and some thousand of those people were kids, little kids. But an interesting thing happened. Nobody died. If you go there, what you find is that there's these little houses all over that area. And each one of those little houses has a wooden dugout canoe tied off to a dock. And that's the way these people live. So as the water started to rise, they started tying their canoes together. They got mats, and they wove these mats together, tied them all up, and they would put the pigs and the chickens and the things in the middle of the mat. If there was anything that was valuable in the house, they would put it in the mat. And this entire little community just started to float. And it floated like that for about 20 days. And then as the water started to recede, they went back to what was left of their house. In some cases, there wasn't much left, and they had to start to rebuild. In other cases, the damage wasn't all that terrible. We were called in there to work with Margarita Zavala, First Lady of Mexico. My friend Eduardo Arnal is here today. He's the Consul General in Chicago for the country of Mexico. And that was large part due to the introduction of Eduardo. But I flew in that helicopter over the area, and it was with Mrs. Zavala, and it was just absolute devastation. It was incredible. And I got to thinking, if that was my house, what would I put in my canoe as I saw the water start to rise? What are those things that are really, really important in your life that you would grab hold of in the case of an emergency like that? I've got a friend of mine, Dean Nelson is his name. He's a stringer for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Dean is a journalism professor in San Diego. And back a couple of years ago, Dean had to go through this when they had those wildfires that raced through Rancho Bernardo. And I remember him writing in the New York Times about leaving his house and leaving the voicemail machine on. And every hour he would call his house, because if the voicemail picked up, he knew the house was still there because the machine still worked. And he talked about all of the stuff that they ran through the house and they grabbed and they put in the trunk of the car and they left thinking, we're not going to see anything else again. And I wondered about this morning. If you had to take 3 things, what are the most important things that you would take with you? Think about that for a minute. What would you put in your canoe? What would you put in the trunk of your car? And how many of the things that you value are the things that aren't tangible? What about the stuff you can't put in a canoe? What about all the stuff that you can't put in a car? Life itself. Your friends, your relationships, your value system. And if that's true for our houses, isn't that true for the places where we work? If you are an executive today, this, above all else, is your charge. If you sit on a board of directors for an organization like Project C.U.R.E. or the YMCA, if you sit on the board of directors of your church, if you are on the board of directors of a company, there is probably nothing more important that you do, that I do every day, than to decide what goes in the canoe, right? What are those things that are the most important? We are the CVOs, the Chief Value Officers of our company. What we say is important becomes important to a lot of other people. My dad recognized this. My pop was a business guy. He grew up in a little town in rural Idaho and decided that there wasn't much future there, and so he moved the family to Colorado when I was about 2 years old. My dad decided that he was going to be a millionaire before he was the age of 30, and he failed. He did it at 31. And then he did it 16, 17 times over. He developed a couple of little ski areas in Colorado, one's called Winter Park, and he did a little bit in Vail. He hit it right at a right time, and he made a bucket load of money. And I remember as a kid going to school in a black Bentley, truly. We had a big, big house on the creek up in Evergreen. Life was good. But you know, a funny thing happened. My mom and dad did the canoe exercise. They started talking about what's really important in our life. What is it that our value system says? What are we teaching our two boys, my brother and myself? And so one Saturday morning, they sat us down at this little birch kitchen table and they said, boys, we've done something crazy. We started this foundation. And we put all of our money in that, and what that effectively means is that you have no inheritance. If you want it, you go get it. We did. So you're on your own. And that doesn't quite sink in when you're a junior in high school. The first tuition bill you get, when Dad says, remember what I told you, you got to make it, then things start to get kind of real. And that's exactly what happened. And my dad and mom gave their money to churches and to schools and to other people that were in need. And then my dad came to this realization that it's not just about the tangible stuff that goes in the canoe, it's also about the intangible stuff. And he said, you know what? I made a lot of money because of what was between my two ears. I should share that too. So my pop started doing economic consulting all over the world. He started in Africa, and he ended up in Latin America, working in Peru and Ecuador, and he landed in Brazil. And he was working on a project called the Libre proposal that was a trade thing because Brazil was having a difficult time. And he had an interpreter named Lorena. And Lorena was from Chile. She was in Brazil going to medical school. And she said, Jim, you know, one of these Sundays, we'd like to take you to this clinic where my mom and I work. Her mom was a doctor as well. She said, we volunteer our time at this town called Mesquite. It's just outside of Rio de Janeiro, and we'd like to introduce you to Dr. Neves. We'd like you to see what we do. So my dad went with them, and they went into this little beat-up ramshackle house in the middle of this community of 300,000 people. And my dad walked in there and he looked at this doctor and he says, hey, I'm not a medical guy, but I can just tell you, you can't do medicine like this. You got nothing here. There's a box of bandages, you know, the old metal boxes with the glass front, and there's a metal, kind of an old exam table, and on the back porch there was a drill that this guy had just put in, and the drill was run by your feet, you know, an old treadle drill. And my dad looked at this doctor and said, what do you think about it? And the guy says, well, we have 3,000% inflation in this country. We can't buy anything. What am I supposed to do? My dad said, well, if I got you some things donated, could you get it into the country without getting it taken on the black market? And the guy said, well, you're the guy working with the president of the country. Why don't you go do that? And that day my dad flew to Brasilia, actually got President Sarney to sign an agreement that he could bring things into the country with no duty and no tariff. And then he went back to Denver. And he was having lunch with a group of people, and they said, hey, Jim, how was your trip to Brazil? And he said, oh, I just did something really stupid. I just promised this doctor I was going to help him, and I don't know where I'm going to get more than a Band-Aid. And one of his friends looked across the table at him and said, well, that's no problem. You know, my partner Pete and I, we own a medical wholesale company. We'll give you stuff. And that day he gave my dad $50,000 of medical supplies, right off the shelf out of his warehouse. And then he started calling all of his competitors, the people that he was in business against, right? Can you imagine doing that? Hey, I just donated. You should donate. And they did. And in about 30 days, they had filled my parents' garages full of stuff up in Evergreen, and about $250,000 worth of medical supplies. And they got a container. Now, I need to stop right there for just a second, because sometimes when I say container, people will say, oh, that's a cool thing. If I came by the warehouse today, how many of these containers could I put in my Suburban? Well, you can put 2.5 Suburbans in a container. This is a semi-truck trailer full of stuff. So my dad and mom paid that shipment on that container, and they sent that down to that doctor there in Brazil, and then they got another call, and another call, and another call. And my dad said to my brother and I one Christmas, he said, you know, I think we're onto something here. What do you think we got to do? And he said, yeah, go for it, Dad, you know. And so we started to travel, and this thing started to grow. And today my friends at USAID and the State Department tell me that we are the biggest in the world doing what we do. We ship, we're now shipping 3 semi-truck trailers every week of medical supplies and equipment. This is the extra stuff. This is the gleaning around the edges of the field in the medical industry in the United States. It's a company like Terumo that manufactures needles and syringes. And when they change the way that they make the break-off on a single-use needle and syringe, they have a half a warehouse full of the old kind, but they're not going to sell it anymore. You got a new product. What do you do with it? If you're a hospital and you replace the x-ray machine, it's not because the old one didn't work, it's because they came up with some new digital cool thing. What do you do with the old one? And the answer in this country, sadly, is we throw it in the garbage. We throw it in the garbage. So we have just tried to create a little business of goodness, a business that says, we'll go to those companies and we'll help them make the right decision with this stuff. So Terumo sent us 3 semi-truck trailers full of needles and syringes that we put into countries where the AIDS rate is 30, 40, 50%. That means if you go to the hospital and you're injected with a used needle, the first time it's a 50-50 shot at getting disease. The next time it's almost guaranteed you're going to get it, and by the 3rd use of that needle, you're spreading disease faster than you're healing people. What's the value of a clean needle and syringe? Here, we throw it away. There, they save lives with it. And we do that day after day after day. Chief Values Officer. What are your corporate values? To make this whole thing run, we've got about 450,000 square feet of warehouse in 14 cities across the United States. We've got 4 big ones. Denver, Phoenix, Nashville, and Houston. Chicago will be our 5th big warehouse. Nancy Abate is running Project C.U.R.E for us here in Chicago, and I saw Dan and Harry and some of our people on our advisory board. We're doing this a lot in this town. We're throwing a lot of good stuff away, and we need to stop doing it. It's 2012. Somebody needs to stand up and say this is not okay. In my CVO, in my Chief Value Officer statement, it is not okay to throw things away that we would send to somebody else to save their life, period. To make all this happen, we've got about 15,000 volunteers. Let me let that sink in to you for a minute. 15,000 people whose personal CVO statement said, I'm going to do something to give back. I'm not content to sit and watch on the television and watch the people in Tabasco float around on these things. I want to do something about that. How do I do it? Well, we're going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to go to a Project C.U.R.E. warehouse. We're going to put all the needles and syringes in one box and all the IV starting kits in another box. We're going to take all the boxes and put them into a big box, and a big box goes in a bigger box. Everybody talks about thinking outside the box. Everything we do is inside the box. We think inside the box. And we move these things out. 21 staff people on payroll. Less than 2% operating overhead. And an army of 15,000 good-hearted people in this country who decided that they're going to change the world. That's what this is about. Now that presents a challenge for me, and this is part of what I want to share with you today. How do you motivate 15,000 people when you don't have a paycheck? And I've discovered something that I call the passion principle. I was having lunch with a friend of mine named Andre, and Andre runs the Denver Athletic Club, and we were sitting talking one afternoon at lunch, and I said, what'd you do this weekend, Andre? And he said, well, I took my board and we went and did a board retreat. And I said, yeah, what happened? I mean, did it work out okay? And he said, well, we went over our mission statement and our core values, and we did our strategic plan, and we did our tactics and our SWOT analysis. And I said, yeah, how'd that work out? What'd you do with it? I said, I will bet you lunch today that it went right back in the file drawer, didn't it? And 1 year from now, when you take your staff and your board back up to Breckenridge and you lock them inside of a hotel in one of the most beautiful places in the world. Why do we do that, by the way? Why do you retreat to go forward? Do you ever think about that? Why do we go to a hotel in some really cool places like the city of Chicago and then sit in the hotel all day? You don't think that way. We don't be creative that way, but that's what he did. I said, I'll bet you don't even look at this for another year, and I'll bet you in a year you're going to go through the same process. I said, what's your passion statement, Andre? And he looked at me and he said, what do you mean passion statement? I said, what drives you? Let me ask you a different way, because this is the problem I've got every week. If on Friday you walked into the athletic club and you said, as of Monday, we ain't paying anybody. No more money, no more paycheck, no more payroll, we're done. How many people come to work for you on Tuesday? He said, nobody. I said, well, that's a problem, isn't it? What's your passion statement? And we got to talking about what we do and how we create passion, and how at Project C.U.R.E. we tell the stories of the people that we met in Izmit and Goldchuk, Turkey, and in Mexico, and in 123 other countries around the world. I've got pictures that I show people, and they say, you know what you're doing with your afternoon? It's 2 hours, Philip. 2 hours you're going to spend here with us. And this is the difference you're going to make, and this is the little girl that you're going to save. That, my friends, is passion. He said, well, Doug, how do I do that in my own business? I said, well, here's an idea. Let's get staff meeting together. Let's get everybody that works for the athletic club in a room. And then let's get Mr. Johnson that comes in. Top of his game, executive, 57 years old, kids, grandkids, everything's going good. Until one morning he gets this pain in his chest, and he goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, you're all clogged up. You're going to have some surgery here. We're going to have to open this back up. You're going to have to change your lifestyle. Get Mr. Johnson to come up in front of everybody and tell that story. And then get his trainer to come up. And let Mr. Johnson tell the rest of your staff about how the trainer would call him at 5 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, Bill, get out of bed. We're down here. We got a workout to do. And then let Mr. Johnson tell you about how his cholesterol numbers are down, how he can run and walk and do all these things. You just put an extra 30 years on this guy's life. Is that passion? Could I get excited about going to work for a company like that, knowing that I'm going to change somebody's life? And the next quarter, you get the woman that runs your daycare. and the mom who couldn't find a place for her kids. And now the kids love that daycare provider, that worker, that staff member of yours so much that they don't even want to go home. I mean, who ever heard of a kid crying because he's got to go home instead of crying because he's got to go to daycare? That's what you do here. I said, I know it because I see it. And what if you started to inculcate that every day? Tell that story into the lives and the hearts of your staff. Do you think that you could start to change your company from the inside out? We talk a lot about this with corporate social responsibility in this. Have you all heard of the triple bottom line accounting? It's profits, it's planet, and it's people, right? What do we do to earn profit? Everybody knows that. What are we doing environmentally? That's the second bottom line measure. And the third is, what are we doing to take care of everybody else? Triple bottom line accounting. And that's really the heart of this whole corporate social responsibility thing. My proposal to you today is that our CSR is not something that we paint on the side of a building. It's not something that we decal on the side of our delivery trucks. It's not something that we nail onto some place and say, now we are a good corporate citizen. Our corporate social responsibility starts with our people. And I don't mean to be too touchy-feely. I got a background in law and finance. I am fundamentally touchy-feely challenged. But if we don't start addressing what's going on in the heart of the people we work with, you can't ever get their hands to get involved either. And so many times we come in and we say, I'm going to tell you what to do to be a good corporate citizen. I'm going to mandate all of this stuff. And my friends, if we haven't touched what's in here, we're never going to impact what's out there. What's our passion statement? You're the CVO, you're the Chief Values Officer. What's your passion statement? And how do we share that with the people around us? You see, one of the things that I've learned is that people don't necessarily work for money. Now, I've got a 9-year-old daughter, and her name is Caroline, and Caroline is broke. She's 9. This little kiddo will do anything for $5. Hey, Caroline, you want to wash the windows in my apartment? Got $5 in it for you. Man, she's got the Windex bottle, and she's scrubbing down, and I'm figuring I'm paying her 2 cents an hour. But she is the richest little kid in the world for having a $5 bill in her pocket. Now what we're trying to do is to teach her to save it. Do you really want to spend that money on candy, you know? At some point, the economists tell us that we reach a point of marginal economic satiation. Now that's a really big word. That means that Donald Trump couldn't care less about another $5. I can motivate Caroline to do it because Caroline doesn't have $5. But at some point, that money stops being a motivating factor. There's a really interesting book right now called Drive by a guy named Daniel Pink, and if you haven't read it, I would recommend it to you. Daniel Pink sat down and started thinking about this topic, and what he came up with was this interesting result. And the result is that the things that we do in our society to motivate people are actually counterproductive. Now, I was raised in a situation where I thought commission was the coolest thing in the world, right? If you do more, then you earn more. If I want another little bit, then I just work a little bit harder and you pay me more. One of the things that Daniel Pink found was that that's actually really deleterious. It tears up teamwork within our companies. Because there is at some point, some situation, some feeling that if you get more, I get less. And we start to create competition within people who should be working together. And all of this stuff that we do on motivation really stops working. And we've got to start finding something else that motivates our people, ourselves, our staff, the people that we work with. And it goes back to this passion statement. What do you really, truly believe in? If somebody hasn't understood the value of going out into the forester walking along the lake, if they don't really get it, you're never going to make them an environmentalist. And it doesn't matter how much triple bottom line accounting you do, it's not going to happen. It starts in the heart. It starts in the head. And then it moves out to the hands. We've learned this in Project C.U.R.E, and we've seen it happen from beginning to end. Here in Chicago, one of our corporate partners is Miller Coors, and I've watched the team and the staff at Miller Coors do some pretty cool things, including the folks at the Coors Brewery in Denver, Colorado, coming quarterly to the big Project C.U.R.E warehouse out there in Denver and load containers. Ed McBrien, the president of sales, sitting right down here on Wacker. I have been in a container, loading a container with Ed and with Eduardo and a couple of other the executives on the way to Mexico. And we sweated. And we wore these goofy looking t-shirts. And we worked hard. The staff folks, the executive folks. Ed brought his kids. Now what does that say to the rest of your team when you say, this is important enough to me to take a Saturday morning out of my life to pull my kids out of whatever it was that they were doing. We're going to do this all together. We're going to work together on this thing. I don't really care if you're 6 pay grades under me. Today we're equal. And this is my heart, and this is what I do, because it means something to me. I watched this happen with the Seaboard Manufacturing Company. Seaboard is a big company that they manufacture wheat flour all over the world. And I met a man in Washington, D.C. named Ralph Moss, and Ralph is a lobbyist. Ralph is one of the sharpest dressed lobbyists that I've ever seen. We were in Washington, D.C. together on one of those sweltering hot days. It was about 92 degrees and 100% humidity. And I went to Ralph's office to meet with him. We were going over to Capitol Hill to talk to some of the senators and congressmen about some projects that Project C.U.R.E was doing. He said, yeah, I know Sam. Well, Sam Brownback, that's a good friend of Ralph's. I know this guy, I know that guy. Let's go, Doug. He shows up in a seersucker suit with those Spectator Oxfords, you know, the white and black ones, and a wild bow tie, and this big pair of round glasses that matched his bow tie. What I've learned is that Ralph has a pair of big round glasses that match every tie he has in his closet. The only time I have ever ridden the senator's train from the House to the Senate side was with Ralph. He walked up, the guard said, hey, Ralph, opens the door, we sit down in the train. They must think he's a senator, because he runs all over Capitol Hill, this guy. So we started talking about doing this project in Democratic Republic of Congo. They had just started a new wheat flour manufacturing plant, and he said, you know, here's the problem. It's a little bit selfish, a little bit, because we want to make sure that our employees stay well. There's no health care, Doug. There's a problem in that community because we're going to put our employees into that community. And if they get sick, there's no way that we can make them well other than flying them out of the country. He said, but more than that, we want to do something different. We want to go in and establish a footprint of goodness. We want to establish that business of goodness. We want to do well by doing good. So we picked a hospital, and we're going to fix it with your help. So Project C.U.R.E did a needs assessment. You see, every time we start any project that we do, we send somebody over to do a needs assessment. We sit down with the doctor. We talk to the nurses. We say, hey, listen, what is it that you do here? And we do that because the stories are legion about people who just have a good heart and a very small brain sometimes. And they just start sending stuff, right? I was down in after the hurricanes in Honduras, and people were sending winter coats to Honduras. Thank you, don't need these. So we always want to make sure that if we're sending something, we're not sending surgical drills to an OBGYN hospital, right? You don't need a surgical drill to deliver a baby. It's pretty important that we know that up front, right? So we went with Ralph and we did the needs assessment on these hospitals, and we kind of figured out what these people need. And we shipped a couple of containers over there. It cost us about $20,000 to deliver 400,000. The value of what's in a semi-truck trailer is about $500,000. So every time a company like Seaboard gives us a nickel, we deliver $1. Well, Ralph's a pretty sharp business guy, and he said, that makes sense to me. So they did. They wrote out the check, about $40,000. We delivered 2 containers, almost $1 million of medical supplies. They started this hospital. And Ralph went over with the guy that owns Seaboard, his boss. And they dedicated this hospital. They had a big red ribbon, and they did the whole ribbon cutting thing. The governor was there, the governor's wife, everybody from Seaboard, somebody from the United States Embassy. It was a big deal. And Ralph called me when he got back. I said, how did it go? He said, Doug, you'd be so proud. He said, that hospital looks every bit as good as a hospital here in Reston, Virginia. Those people are getting good health care now before they had nothing. And thanks to our partnership, we're going to change the world in that part of the country. I said, really, were the people happy? Long pause on the phone, and he said, let me tell you a story. He said, there was a woman who walked into the hospital, and she had a little kid. And she's walking through, and she looks at the governor's wife, and she said, so this is what you get if you work for Seaboard, huh? And the governor's wife looked at her and said, no, this is what you and your child get because Seaboard is here. They did this hospital, and they gave it to you. And Ralph said that mom started to cry. He said the governor's wife started to cry. He said, I'm standing there blubbering like a baby. I'm sure his glasses were all fogged up. He said, I look over at my boss, and he says, I'm totally embarrassed. He said, my boss just turned around and walked away so I wouldn't see him cry. He said it was an important red-letter day in the history of Seaboard. And not just because of what happened in Congo, but what happened to the people, the staff, the team at Seaboard. We did it again in Panama with CH2M Hill. They got this little $6 billion contract to replace the Panama Canal. I went down with Lee McIntyre, the CEO of CH2M Hill, the biggest engineering company in the world. And we were there with Mrs. Martinelli, the First Lady of Panama, and we cut the ribbon on a big container. Kind of a cool thing happens. We have this little ethos thing that we do. At the very last part of loading the container, we take a big piece of cardboard, an old cardboard box, and everybody who loaded that container gets to sign it, right? With love from Project C.U.R.E, Denver, Colorado, and we tape it on the back of the back boxes, so when you open the big doors of that semi-truck trailer, here's the sign, and then you got all the stuff in the container. We open this thing up, this container is sitting in the middle of the street in Panama City, right downtown next to the pediatrics hospital. And they go and they open the container, Lee McIntyre on one side, the First Lady of Panama on the other side. We open it up and he looks up at this sign and he says, oh my gosh, that's my secretary. She loaded the container. His values transferred all the way down through the organization and around and back up to the executive office, and he's gone somewhere in the world, and his secretary is down at Project C.U.R.E loading a container. The next morning, we got up, we were having breakfast together, and Lee's wife Susan comes down and she tosses this newspaper on the table and she said, Lee, did you see this? They had shipped 2 40-foot cargo containers to Panama. The front page of the paper in Panama, CH2M Hill donates $800,000 relief to the children of Panama. Every one of his employees got up that morning and saw the good that they had just done. They put it on their website. He carried a stack of those papers back home. You can do well by doing good. It's got to start with us, the chief value officers of our organization. It's got to start in the heart. You can't tack it onto the outside. It's got to grow up grassroots. And when it does, things start to change. We're all better off for it. It starts to make some sense. It made sense to Albert Schweitzer, and I'll just leave you with this. Schweitzer, as you recall, was a Lutheran minister in Germany who loved to play the organ. But he kept reading, and he thought maybe God loves poor people. So he went back and he got a medical degree. And he went to a country that we now know as Gabon, to a place where nobody had ever been before with medical care. And he started the Albert Schweitzer Hospital in the country of Gabon in Africa. He died there. You can go there and see his grave. It's next to the river. He said, I don't want to be born back in Germany. My heart is here. Schweitzer won a Nobel Prize. And he had this to say. He said, "I don't know what your destiny will be, but this one thing that I do know. The only ones among you who will ever be truly happy are those who seek and find ways to serve other people." Wouldn't it be great if we were happy? It's not a function of how much stuff we put in our canoe. It's a function of what goes on inside this canoe. I don't know what your destiny will be, but this one thing I do know, the only ones among you who will ever be truly happy are those who seek and find ways to serve other people. God bless you on your quest for that goal. Thank you.
We have some like 5 to 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes for a couple of questions, if you will.
Yes, sir.
How many countries have you visited? And do you also, in addition to equipment, and Dan told me some of the things about what you do, do you also get pharmaceuticals and chairs for handicaps and other items related to hospitals?
Good question. How many countries have we visited? I don't know how many I personally have visited. Lots. We've worked on 100 and I think it's 26 now, the count of how many places Project C.U.R.E. has worked. We do equipment. We do ship equipment and things like wheelchairs, crutches. We ship all the supplies that go along with it. If you send an anesthesia machine, it doesn't work without the circuit set, right? You got to have a mask to make it work. So we've got this little computer program in our warehouse so that when we put in one anesthesia machine, it also goes out and it pulls an inventory for all of the other stuff that has to go with it to make it work. But yeah, so we send all of that stuff. Pharmaceuticals is a tough thing though, for a number of different reasons. The value is so high, if you want to get your stuff stolen, put a bunch of drugs in the container and somebody is sure to see it and they're going to steal it. They're going to take it. You can't put it in a container because if it sits on the dock in Mombasa for 3 weeks while the customs figures out what they're doing and it gets to be 100 degrees inside the container, all the medicine is shot, right? You can take a brand new bottle of pills, put it on the dashboard in your car, by lunchtime the bottle of pills is not worth anything. You can take a bottle of pills and you can stick it in your refrigerator where it's dark and it's cool and it'll probably be good twice of whatever's on the expiration date. That date doesn't mean anything. It's how you take care of it. And so we're really, really careful on pharmaceuticals. We've got what we call cure clinics where we take doctors and doctors will hand carry the pharmaceuticals in with them when they do that. But typically we won't put much drugs on a container. Yeah, good question. Another question?
How do you become a volunteer with your organization?
Good question. How do you become a volunteer with Project C.U.R.E.? Well, here in Chicago, you talk to Nancy Abate, and she'll get you plugged in. Soon, we hope to have a warehouse here in Chicago. We're always looking for donated warehouse space because I just have this visceral thing about taking money from you and giving it to somebody else who's a warehouse owner, right? So the warehouses that we own, and all the rest of them are all donated. So we're looking for donated space. And when that happens, then we're going to have a Niagara Day at the warehouse, and you're all invited to come out and roll up your sleeves. We're going to get dirty and load containers. Yeah, but that would be the easiest way. We've got some cool stuff. We've got a program that we called Kids Kits, and it was one of these things, frankly, I stole it from Franklin Graham at Samaritan's Purse. He does this Operation Christmas Child. It's a great program. The kids don't die for lack of a Barbie doll. They do die for lack of Tylenol. So we put this program together where we've got these little kids kit. It's a box about the size of a shoebox, and people will take that kit out and they go to the local CVS or Walgreens or whatever, and they put all this stuff in there. And there's a list on the back of the box, right? We'll give you the box for free. You put the stuff in there, and then you put a $5 check in, because that's about what it costs us to get a shoebox anywhere in the world. And then we ship it all over the world. And that would be another fun way to get involved until we've got a warehouse here, would be doing something like that. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to plug in. Yes.
Do you have relationships with hospitals that you replenish? Because obviously they're not always keeping.
Right. Do we have a relationship with the hospitals where we go back and we replenish the hospital? And the answer is yes. Ultimately, though, that's not the goal. I've got this firm feeling that the goal of any nonprofit should be to put themselves out of business. And I don't mean by, you know, like Andy Grove wrote, only the paranoid survive, right? Let's destroy ourselves so we can reinvent ourselves and beat the competition. I mean, if you're really attacking the cause and not the symptom, then we should be out of business pretty soon, right? So when we go into a hospital and we talk to these people, I was just in Sinaloa, Mexico the week before Christmas. I sat down with every one of those doctors and I said, I want you to understand something. In 5 years, I don't want you calling me back. Now, if you have to, then we'll be here for you. But the idea is for you to create a laboratory or a delivery suite or something where somebody will come in and they'll pay maybe $5, but at least gets you out of this cycle of taking, and it allows you to turn a little hospital into a profit center and work your way out of this thing. Because if they're dependent on us, then that doesn't really help them long term. So in the short term, the answer is yes. In the long term, we'd like to get them sort of off the dole.
Do you ever work with domestic hospital, in rural areas in the United States that might have needs or financial needs?
Do we ever work in rural areas of the United States that have needs? And the answer is no. And you can blame all of those of us who are lawyers for that result. We actually have to sign agreements with some of the hospital chains and with the manufacturers that we do not distribute in the United States. Now, it's not because they don't want to help the United States, but it's because you get sued in this country. And they want to be able to control their avenue of distribution and know who owns that table. I was with a bed manufacturer, and I was talking to corporate counsel, and I said, you guys really get sued on used beds? And she looked at me and she said, Doug, we get sued on brand new beds. She said, we just had a lawsuit the other day because somebody came in for observation, got out of bed in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and slipped and fell, and we get sued because the railings didn't keep this gentleman in bed. You got to be kidding me. But that's the society in which we live, and that's part of the reason why our healthcare costs are so high, and that's another topic for discussion. But so yeah, it makes it really, really difficult for us to distribute in the United States, so we just don't. I was honored to be at the Niagara Foundation. I mean, this is a really cool thing that happens here in Chicago, and to be able to speak here is a treat. It's an honor. We talked today about this idea of corporate social responsibility and what we do within our organizations to help other people and to really change the world using the framework of the organizations that we have. So even though a company might be delivering some product or some service, they can still get involved and change the world. And we do that by starting with what is in our hearts. I mean, what happens to the employees, and then we kind of go on from there.